Okay, in this video we'll take a look at document management. Document management is being introduced in Control 5.5. Basically allows you to take and have all of your artwork associated with orders, estimates, or companies, and have all those actually accessible inside of Control. You probably may have an existing document management system that you have currently for this that you've created over the years or what have you. Controls is its own flavor of that. You have the ability to have folders automatically created for any of those types that I just mentioned, the estimates, orders, and companies. Inside of Control, what we've actually done is these documents aren't saved inside of your database, so they're not inside of SQL or anything. They're actually on your network. It's all managed by Windows and NTFS permissions and all of that kind of thing. So much like you probably have right now in a solution is really what you have available in Control, except the main difference is that we will automatically create these folders for you. We'll handle the naming structure in a logical manner. If you rename companies or anything along those lines, then we'll try and clean up those folders so that those names also change in those folders when you actually change the names inside the system. If we scroll on down, we'll see a little bit more on just kind of a user advantages and what kind of users document management will typically appeal to. Right now in the system, pretty much every signing graphics business that's out there has to manage documents in some kind of form or fashion. You may have just a series of different folders that are set up, or you may have, folders on each individual system, or they may be on a network attached storage or something along those lines. So we try to make it pretty intuitive and powerful and easy to administer, much like you've used to administering for many years all the different documents that you have. It pretty much works exactly the same way. Typically users that will really be interested in this feature are ones that have a lot of repeat business where there's a greater requirement for you to have those documents and artwork and permits and fonts or any kind of color management stuff. Just information that is specific to orders or companies that you readily need to access. Particularly larger organizations as well, where there's a lot of different users that could be involved in the order creation and the workflow process to actually get something through production. If you're a smaller organization, one or two people, it's still a great feature to have in the system just for organizing things. So what we'll do is we'll kind of dive in and actually take a look at the feature inside of Control. And this is Control 5.5 right now. We'll start out with setting up document management, and to do that we'll click on Setup and we'll come down to System Setup, and over on the left hand side we'll see Document Manager. If I go ahead and actually edit here on the right, I can enable the document management, and I can choose whether I'm going to do this for orders and service tickets, estimates, or companies as well. In my case, we want to do all three. You'll see when I check these off, we get a series of folders down here. We'll talk about those in just a second. And we need to set up the path or share of where these documents will be stored. Now, Sirius uses its own naming structure for documents, so we're going to have to create a series of folders that we'll use. This can either be local to your server, it can be on the network storage or what have you, but you'll want to make sure that wherever you place it, all of the users inside of your system that need access for these files have the rights to do so. Now that could either be through just regular share permissions or domain or workgroup permissions, but if you're unfamiliar with any of those terms, then you'll want to consult with your IT person and have them help you in setting this up or migrating your existing documents into this type of structure. So in this case, what I've done, just to kind of illustrate how this is set up, we'll take a look at my computer here, and I've got two drives, a C and an E, and on the E drive I've got a folder here called Documents. Now we'll assume that this is actually a shared folder, which if we take a look, we'll see that this is a shared folder just called Documents. If I go in here, I've basically got some default folders. Now these popped up right when I started checking off these boxes. So it started to create default folders for each one of these different types of transactions or records that I'm going to actually start storing documents on. So we'll go ahead and type in the share path. In my case, it's already been filled in this system. We'll specify / the computer name / and then whatever the share name is for that document. Again, it's very important that this is a shared path across the network, or else any of the users that are not local to your machine won't be able to access these files. So I'll go ahead and save this. And I've now got these options enabled for document management. And now to talk a little bit more about these tabs at the bottom, what we'll see is order, service ticket, estimate, and company. Now, routinely when we talk about document management and working with different customers in trying to develop the feature, what we found is that people would routinely want to have a folder that's created by default on an order, and they may want things to automatically appear in that folder. So if we're talking about orders, some people may just want a folder for the order and they put everything in it. Could be artwork, permits, any surveys, could be fonts, or just doesn't matter. Could be anything related to that order, and they just want it kind of in one folder, and it's all dumped in there. In other cases, users were very vocal in saying that, can I have some default folders or files that automatically appear in there? And to give you an example, so let's say on an order, maybe I want a folder that's for artwork, and maybe I want one that's for permits, for instance. And I want those folders to automatically always be there when I create a new transaction, and it creates a dedicated folder to store the documents in for that order. Now what we'll see is when I'm inside of this view, what I'm really looking at is a view of the back end in Windows. So if I click back over to this documents folder and I go into default folders and let's go to order, we'll see that those two folders that I just created from this screen are actually appearing directly in Windows. And that's because, as I mentioned earlier, the document management inside of Control is really all about just interfacing or linking Windows to Control. It's not that we're maintaining the documents inside of any kind of database or anything like that. We're just establishing that link or that relationship between your Windows files and being able to access them inside of Control. So in this case, let's just say also I've got two folders here, but maybe on the company level I want a default file to always be there, and maybe that's a credit application. So I'm just going to pull this Word document that I've got for a credit application, and I'm just going to paste it right into the screen. And you can either use keyboard shortcuts for those of you that are, kind of familiar with that, or you can just right click and paste. You can hit add to browse for a file name or for a file that you want to attach. You can use the toolbar across the top too. It should be very similar to what you're used to working with in Windows. We really wanted to make sure that it was intuitive, and anyone that's really worked around with any kind of files or folders wouldn't have any kind of learning curve to come up to speed with it. So in this case, we'll see that on the company level, there'll always be this credit application file in here. And just to show you again, this is really just a link to Windows and the file system you have in place. We'll back up on the default folders and we'll go into company, and we'll see that credit application is actually there. So again, just a link between the two. If I wanted to create any additional default folders and service tickets or estimates, then I could do so. In this case, we're going to skip it. Now the other couple options that are on the screen that we didn't talk to, we kind of just passed right by, were these three buttons up at the top. Now what these do is basically, when you first enable document management, if you're a brand new customer to Control and you're just starting out in business, maybe you don't have any documents yet to store. So if that's the case, then these are probably irrelevant for you. However, if you've been using Control for years, and let's just say you have a couple hundred open orders, those would be things in WIP, built, and sale, and you want to have the default folders created for those so you can store your documents, then that's what really these buttons are for. We also have one for pending estimates and one for active clients. Now we don't create them for prospects on the fly, particularly because we found that in our research, lots and lots of customers could have 10, 15, 20,000 prospects that are in there from different lists that they've purchased over the years. We don't want to go creating a whole bunch of empty folders all over the place for people you may never do business with. So in this case, I don't have that much information in my database right now, so I'm going to click on all three of these buttons so you can kind of see what happens. So I'll go ahead and click on Create Open Folders, and it'll tell me that, hey, I'm going to basically create folders for all these open orders that are there. And if I have thousands that are open, it may take a little while, so just be patient with it. I'm going to tell it yes, and I'll go ahead and hit OK. And now let's do the one for pending estimates, and I'll hit yes, and active clients. And it's created those folders for me. Now if I browse right back over to my actual Windows file system, I'll go up to Documents, and we'll see I've got three new folders: Company, Estimate, and Order. If I come into Company, you'll notice we've got letters here for each of the different groups of companies that we have. So everybody that starts with A, I see all those. If I jump down to, let's say, J, I've only got one that's actually J. And let's see if I've got a couple in the W's. I don't see every single alphabet. It's only the active clients. So if I had active clients that was for every letter in the alphabet, then I would have all of those. And as you create new companies, it will automatically create the relevant alphabetical character and then any subfolders as we begin to add more and more records to control. If I take a look at estimates, in estimates we actually use a naming convention that goes in the thousands sequence, and the same thing for orders. So if I have any estimate numbers that are between 0 and 999, then they're going to be in the 0 folder, which I just have one. And we name these folders in the convention of E for estimate, whatever the estimate number is, the company name, and then the company's account number in control. So that if you at some point wanted to search for all documents that were for a specific company, you could just type parentheses 218 parentheses in your root of your documents and actually find all the folders that were for every estimate or every order or so forth. I'll go ahead and back out of this. Let's take a look at orders. And in this case, we just had open orders in the 8,000 range, and we'll see it's created all these folders for it. Now, if I go into one of these folders, we'll notice that there's an artwork and a permits folder there. If you recall, when we were looking at the default folders here, we said, hey, when you go and create a folder for document management for orders, let's create one for artwork and let's create one for permits. So that's what you're seeing in every one of them, so that it just saves you time. You don't have to do it every case. Alright, so now that we've kind of looked through the setup of how to actually configure document management, now let's actually look and see what it looks like inside the system. So what we'll start out doing is we'll go to Explore, we'll take a look at a company, and in this case let's just take a look at Ace Pawn, and we'll notice here I've got a Documents tab that's on this company record. So I'll go ahead and click this, and you'll see there's that credit application that we had copied over into the default folders and files earlier. If I wanted to put something else in here, maybe I've got like a specific font, you know, that this company, I've got to always use this font when I do anything for them. I could take and just right click in here and hit paste. I could hit add and search for this font file and add it in, but I'm just going to right click, paste it in, and you'll notice it just dropped it right in for me. If I want to delete that font from there, just like in regular Windows, just right click, delete, tell it yes or no, and as long as you have the Windows permissions to be able to do so, then you can delete it. None of the security on whether you can add or delete files is handled inside of Control. You'll notice that I was able to add and delete files without actually editing the company record, and that's on purpose so that you don't have to edit all of this and back out of edits and all of that kind of thing. It's just a portal into your file system that you've already been working with for years and years. Alright, so now that we've looked at companies, let's kind of go and take a look at an estimate. And let's just open up a pending estimate. And let's go to the Documents tab. And you'll notice in here, if you recall when we first set this up, I didn't say to have any default folders or files for estimates, so there's nothing in here. But let's just say I do want to add, you know, some sample proof or something like that. I can just copy and paste that in here. If I click on it, as long as I've got a viewer for this file type, which is a JPEG, then it'll show the thumbnail down here. And if I want to open this up larger, just like in normal Windows, I can double click on it, and it will actually open that file for me. I can also open it in any kind of different form viewers that are available if I just right click. So we'll see I can do that. If I wanted to right click, open with, and I want to go to the Illustrator or something like that, then I can also do that. If you find that the files that you're putting in here aren't opening in the programs that you want, that's actually all controlled inside of Windows, where you can specify what file types get opened by default by what program. So that's not inside of Control. So you have complete control over the ability to set that to whatever installed Windows application that you want. Alright, now let's take a look at kind of a converted estimate. Now, earlier when we were talking about creating the folders for pending estimates, that was for pending ones. So when I come to this converted estimate, what we'll see is there is no folder created for it. So we only created it for the ones that were already pending. If you find that you need to create one of the folders for something that's been converted, or maybe a client was not active at the point in time that you created those default folders for the active clients, and then later you want to create one, it's pretty simple. Just come here and just click on the Create Folders button, and it'll create it for you. And we'll notice if I go back into my file system here, there's now one for 1354. In which case I can copy and paste into it, do whatever I want. There are links on the left-hand side for additional folders to open. So if this estimate, for instance, was converted, well, what order was it converted to? So we can we'll go and look here, and this was converted to order number 8177. Well, if we come back to the documents, you'll notice on the left-hand side, you see how it says additional folders, order 8177. So if I wanted to jump to that real quick, I could, or if I want to go right to the company record, then I can. And we'll notice that I've now got a split view between the estimate and the company. So if I've got certain things on the company, maybe it was like fonts or something like that, and I wanted to copy that over to the estimate, then I could. In this case, so let's just say we've actually got that font, but I want to put it right here. So I can just copy it, and I can paste it, and now I've got it there. And if I'm done with this view, I can just hit the X on the top right, and now I'm back to just viewing the estimate. One other thing that we want to look at, I'll take a look at orders. Really works just the same way as all the other ones we've looked at. So I come to the documents, we'll see that those folders are there. We'll see on the additional folders, in this case, this order 8182 was actually cloned from a previous order. So it knows that that link was there, so it's given me that option to go and look at that particular transaction as well. So I'm looking at 8182 and I'm looking at 8181. It's pretty nice, saves a lot of clicks. The really nice thing about it is that if you're already inside of Control, you're a designer or whoever you may be, and you're already working with that particular order, you now don't have to go and dive off into some other document management system you have and kind of drill into all the folders, hope you get the path right and all that kind of stuff. It's really just as simple as clicking from whatever tab you're on currently to that Documents tab, so you can make sure you're always getting what you need. You know, if that's artwork or something like that for the printer, that's very, very important to make sure you're grabbing the right file for this particular job. Now, one thing that will often come up is how do we handle cases to where a company name changes. So as you may have noticed earlier when we were looking at estimates here, see this estimate on this particular screen is named E1354-Bank 1 Prairieville, and in parentheses 230, which is the company's name. If I back up to the Documents folder, come to the company, and we take a look here, there's that Bank 1. What Control will automatically try to do for you if you do change the names of anything is it'll try and auto rename that folder to match the new one. So if we come and take a look at this Bank 1 company and we edit this and we say, hey, you know, this is really not Prairieville, it's really Baton Rouge. So we'll change that. I'll try and go ahead and save it. Change company name. We'll get an information prompt on the window that basically tells us, hey, we're going to rename this folder to this folder. We'll hit OK, and it's now renamed it. If I click back over to Windows, we'll see that it renamed it. It used to say Prairieville. Now, here's the one thing that undoubtedly will happen at some point. You'll likely have someone in the organization which has this file open. So we'll open it up on the screen real quick just to illustrate kind of what will eventually happen. And once we have that file open in Windows, now I've got that open. And for those of y'all familiar with any kind of management of Windows files and folders, what you'll find is that you cannot rename a folder if a file within that folder is actually open or in use. And to illustrate that, what I'll try and do is we'll just try and rename this to BR. And what we'll see is when I go to rename it inside of Windows, it tells me it can't be completed because somebody's got a file in that folder open. And I can hit try again and it still is going to fail. If I cancel off of that, it goes back to what it was. Same thing inside of Control. So if somebody's got this file in Edit mode right now or in open at all, and I try and rename this, so just say BR. I save it. Then it's going to tell me, hey, it's going to try and attempt to rename it, just like we saw before. Hit OK, and now it's told me the same thing that Windows just said. Hey, I've tried to rename this. You've got a file open, or somebody does. Do you want to rename the company anyway? If you choose yes, it's going to go forward and it's actually going to rename this company, but the folder that was previously there where all those documents are is not going to be renamed. So you're going to have to manually go back and correct that. I'm going to choose yes, and what we'll see when I come to the Documents tab is it doesn't have a folder anymore, because there is no Bank One BR in here with this account number, and that's because I've got this file open. So if I go ahead and close out this file, and then I come and I manually fix this and I tell it BR, let's go ahead and close this down. We come back in here, we'll see now that that link to that folder has been reestablished. Undoubtedly that will happen at some point, by people changing company names, and designers or whoever it is has something open. There's really no way to get around that. It's all based around Windows and exclusive rights on the files when they're in use and all that kind of thing. And that's pretty much everything on document management. There are additional instruments that are available on a dashboard if we take a look at those. So those of you that are familiar with looking at and creating your own dashboards, if you come in here, you'll notice this instrument under Explorer and Documents, and I can actually tie this to an Order Explorer, for instance, so that when I'm looking at an open order, I can look directly in at the documents, and I can rearrange these. You can do the same thing for other Explorer types. If I want to look at a company and that company's documents, then it'll automatically have that link there. It's just an additional way of kind of keeping you from having to dive into each order to get to the documents. If you tend to work from Explorers and things along those lines, then you can. Now, the one thing to point out here is we don't have line item level documents, so everything's at the order level. So if you're using any of your line item types of things, instruments or what have you, you're still going to need the Order Explorer there to be able to pull this up. That concludes everything on document management. Okay, in this video we'll be taking a look at spell check, which is introduced in Control 5.5. For those that have ever used Microsoft Office or really any other word processing type of program, or even any of the latest browsers, you're probably familiar with exactly what this feature is. We've now embedded it inside of Control, so it'll automatically do spell checking for you. You can put the little red squiggly lines, which most of us are familiar with so far, in the relevant fields. Now, we didn't tie in spell check to every single field in the system. Part of that is because we shouldn't spell check everything. So if we're looking at part names and things along those lines, or fields where you're typing on a lot of abbreviations or shorthand or what have you, we didn't want the system to be constantly checking all of those words, but we did attach the spell check mechanism to most of the common areas where you would want spell checking to actually happen. So what we'll do is we'll just dive in and actually take a look inside of Control and what this looks like. So in Control, if I want to set this up or enable it or adjust any options or anything, you're probably used to going to Setup and System Setup to get the things, but if you go in there, you'll notice spell check is not actually in there. It's actually a user level option. So we'll go to Setup and User Options. We'll come on down to Spell Check Options. We'll see I've already got it enabled in my system, and you can read the little summary of notes, kind of tells you a little bit about it, what have you. If I click on Edit, I can set my preferences. This is very similar to preferences that you'll see in a lot of other programs, whether it's Word or Outlook or whatever it may be. Just basically the treatment of how any of the spell check stuff should happen. I can also set what language I'm in, so am I in English and British or Australian. There are some other dictionaries available. We'll talk about those in one second. In my case, my primary language is just regular English, but I do want to introduce some additional dictionaries that should be used when we're doing spell checking. Particularly, I want the industry dictionary that's been set up, and I want the technical dictionary that's been set up. These are two that basically just have some common industry terms that would normally not validate as a correctly spelled word, but in the sign and graphics industry, everybody knows what they mean, or it's a relevant word there. Same thing in the technical dictionary, things that are related to this particular industry. So I've got those two checked off. You can add more as you want, and it just basically increases the dictionary file that's used to either validate or invalidate words. There's another tab here for custom dictionary. For any of you that have worked with any of the dictionary or the spelling check types of stuff in the past, you probably routinely added your own words or corrections to it. This is very common with company names and things like that. For instance, Sirius, the way that it's spelled. If you type that in Word and you've never typed it before, then it's going to come up and it's going to tell you, hey, this is incorrectly spelled. Well, when you do your spell check, you probably have added that to your dictionary. You may have done some auto-correction. If you're always in the habit of typing the incorrectly, you're just not quick enough on the keyboard or what have you, your sequence is wrong, then you can help add those auto-corrections. You can add in exclusions and things like that as well. If you've set up any of these preferences and you want to default back to kind of what the basic was before you ever changed anything, if you just hit the Reset Preferences button, that'll take care of it for you. Once you actually make that change, just hit Save. And that's really all there is to enabling spell checking. Now let's actually take a look and see how it's used in the system. So if we come and let's just say, let's create a new estimate, and I kind of type in the description field, let's say it's a grand opening sign. Well, I left the A out of grand, and we see that now I've got the red squigglies there. I could either just go manually correct that, or I could right click on the word and I get a list of choices just as you do in many programs. I can click grand, or I can come down and actually click on spelling, in which case I get a little pop-up window here and I get my suggestions. I can either choose to add this to the dictionary, ignore it, whatever I want to do. In this case, I'll just right click on it, choose grand, and we'll notice it changed. If I then come over to the notes tab, for instance, and let's just say I was typing in here, and again we'll just stick with the same word, and we'll say grand opening sign, and we'll notice that again it's going to pick it all up. If I right click and choose spelling, it's going to open up the little prompt for me, and I can go word by word. So I want to change that one, I want to change that one, and that one. And we'll notice there are no misspelled words in this message. Congratulations. The spell check will also work on any of the notes fields here. It'll also work in the memo fields inside of a product. So if I'm looking at, let's just say, the design product, and inside of that design product we'll notice we've got memo fields, which are just those big text block fields for description and production notes. And if I type something in here, let's just say grand opening sign, we'll see I can spell check those as well. And I can change those words. If maybe I didn't want grand to be there, I can highlight it and go to thesaurus. I want to choose something else, then I can use the thesaurus to pick a different word. Very similar to any other applications with spell check. And you'll see the same thing employed in whether I'm looking at estimates, whether I'm looking at orders, any of those note type fields or description fields that you have available, those will get spell checked. But we don't want to do it on any kind of drop downs where we're doing like part names and things like that, where you're choosing different vinyls, where a lot of shorthand or abbreviated stuff is in the system. And that concludes the review of spell check and Control 5.5. Okay, in this video we'll take a look at domain logins, which is a new feature introduced in Control 5.5. If you're currently running on a domain, then what this feature does is basically allows you to take that Windows domain account that you have for each one of your employees and actually link that to the user account that they already have in Control. It basically just eliminates a lot of the dual logins and passwords and all that kind of thing. Just makes it a lot simpler. Typically any organization that's running a domain will probably find this to be a very useful feature. For any non in a domain, then the message really never even appears, or the option never appears for you to actually log in. So we'll see on the screen here what the login screen will look like. It will auto-detect, meaning Control will auto-detect whether you're running in the domain. And if it is, it will actually have your domain name and the username there. You can actually have it automatically start that login process using it, so that you don't even have to hit OK. It just launches Control and starts to boot up for you. So let's kind of dive into control and take a look at the setup of that. And I'll first start with launching control on my screen here. And we'll notice I've got a login prompt, and it's going to ask me, do you want to log in using your domain? In this case, I have to choose no because I haven't set it up. So if I try and log in right now, it doesn't know that my domain user account is actually tied to any particular control account. So I'm going to choose no, and I'll go ahead and log in with my current credentials that are available. And now that we're in control, I'll go ahead and click on setup, and I'll come down to employee setup, and then I'll come over to my user account that's here, and I'll just go ahead and hit edit. And once I'm in here, if I click on change username and password, we'll see that I can associate a domain user with it. In my case, this would be eSerious and B Redlinger. Now I don't have to specify any passwords at all. These are the passwords inside of control for this user account. Really what I'm trying to do is just associate my domain account with my user account in control. So I'll go ahead and type this out. It has to be in the domain/username format. And I'll go ahead and hit OK. And we'll see now here down at the bottom it says domain user, and it's tied my user account to it. So from that point, I'll go ahead and close out of here, and I'll close out of control, and I'll come back and I'll try and log into control, and we'll see login user your domain user. So in this case, I'll go ahead and hit OK, and we'll see that it actually did log me in using my domain credentials. I never even had to specify anything. It's a very nice, very useful feature. Now, a natural question comes up often when you're talking about domain logins and password resets and things along those lines. Most of y'all that are familiar with the password policies inside of Control requires you to change your password every X many days. And that's really all part of PCI compliance because we store credit card information and things along those lines. Also part of PCI compliance is to make sure that your Windows usernames and passwords are rotated and meet certain levels of complexity. Those requirements are not removed if you begin to use your domain login for control. You need to make sure that your domain is up to compliance for that so that we can make sure that we're protected and take the reasonable standards and procedures and to ensure that we're at least trying to mitigate any kind of fraud or hacking attempts for credit card information and so forth. That's really it on domain logins. The setup is really the same for every single user you have. Just go in, edit the employee, specify that account, and just tell your users that now they can log in using that. And that concludes this video on domain login.